In the dead of night, under the shadow of occupied Europe, a secret machine crossed enemy lines. Its gears turned not for Germany, but for Britain, unlocking Hitler's most guarded messages. One stolen device would shift the balance of war, rewriting battles, saving lives, and changing the course of history forever. Europe in 1939 was a continent poised on the edge of catastrophe. In the streets of Berlin, the air was thick with fog and the faint hum of trams winding through narrow avenues. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythms of life, a darker pulse thrummed. Nazi banners fluttered above imposing government buildings, while behind closed doors, Hitler's inner circle whispered strategies that would reshape the world. The Third Reich's ascent was not just a march of armies. It was a war of information, deception, and secrecy. Every move was calculated, every message coded. At the heart of this web of secrecy was the Enigma machine. To the casual observer, it was a strange mechanical device, rotors, plugs, and wires assembled into a humming, cryptographic puzzle. To the German military, it was more than a machine. It was a fortress of secrets, a device that promised absolute security. Hitler himself took comfort in its invulnerability, convinced that the Allies could never penetrate the ciphers that protected U-boat movements, Luftwaffe plans, and the sprawling ambitions of the Wehrmacht. The Enigma's rotating wheels could create billions of possible settings, and the Germans trusted it to guard every operational order with unbreakable precision. Across Europe, however, the stakes could not have been higher. For the Allies, a single intercepted message could mean the difference between victory and annihilation. Convoys threatened by submarines, soldiers advancing blindly into enemy fire, entire campaigns balanced on the razor's edge of information. Yet the Allies faced a dilemma that seemed insurmountable: how to glimpse the secrets of a machine designed to be unknowable. British intelligence, aware of the growing threat, began to assemble a network of codebreakers, mathematicians, and linguists, all tasked with a near impossible mission: to see through the veil of Enigma. The human tension was palpable. Soldiers trained under the assumption that their enemies' plans were unknowable, while civilians in Poland, France, and Scandinavia lived under the shadow of impending invasion. Spies moved quietly through embassies, intercept stations crackled with Morse code, and cryptographic machines clicked relentlessly in the night. In the rooms where British analysts worked, smoke hung in the air and pencils scratched over complex permutations of letters, as men and women attempted to impose order on chaos, to predict a war fought across hundreds of miles, thousands of minds, and countless coded messages. Yet, the Enigma was not just a technological marvel, it was a psychological weapon. It gave Hitler and his commanders confidence bordering on hubris, a belief that their communications were beyond scrutiny, that their empire of information was untouchable. Every intercepted report that hinted at German strategy, every fragment of intelligence, was filtered through layers of human judgment, probability, and sheer determination. The stakes were life and death, and every tick of the machine's rotors could tip the balance. As Europe braced for war, a question loomed over every clandestine operation, every anxious briefing. Could a single machine crack a war-wide empire of secrets? Could Allied hands, guided by intellect, intuition, and relentless perseverance, undo the confidence of a regime that seemed invincible? The answer would determine not just the fate of battles, but the survival of nations, and set the stage for a struggle where every cipher broken could save thousands of lives. In the shadows of Europe, the war of minds had begun, invisible yet more consequential than the roar of any battlefield. The Enigma machine sat on wooden tables in dimly lit rooms across Europe, an unassuming assembly of rotors, wires, and plug boards. To the German officers who handled it daily, it was a symbol of absolute security, a fortress of secrecy encased in metal and code. Each turn of a rotor, each combination of plugs, created a staggering number of possible configurations, over 150 million permutations each day, rendering the messages it encrypted nearly unbreakable. To the Wehrmacht, the Kriegsmarine, and the Luftwaffe, Enigma was not just a machine. It was a psychological shield, a guarantee that their plans would remain invisible to the enemy. In a field post somewhere near the Belgian frontier, a young signal operator tapped out a message to a distant U-boat in the Atlantic. His fingers moved with practiced confidence across the keys, a rhythm drilled into him through endless exercises at military school. The words he transmitted carried the orders for patrol routes, convoy attacks, and supply schedules. He believed, as did his commanders, that each letter was secure, that no enemy could ever decipher these transmissions. Yet, unknown to him, every keystroke was being intercepted, logged, and scrutinized by teams halfway across Europe, in the cramped rooms of British intelligence stations, where minds raced against time and probability. The mechanics of the machine were deceptively simple to look at, yet fiendishly complex in execution. Rotors turned with each key press, altering the electrical pathways. Plugboards allowed operators to swap letters, adding a second layer of complexity. The resulting encryption was a labyrinth. A single message, sent with the machine set to the day's prescribed configuration, could appear as a meaningless jumble of letters. And every day, the settings changed, a new labyrinth waiting to be solved. The Germans trusted this system implicitly. Mistakes were considered improbable. Breakthroughs by enemy cryptanalysts were thought impossible. Yet, the Allies had not given up. Early attempts to penetrate Enigma were met with frustration. Polish mathematicians, most notably Marian Rejewski, had made pioneering inroads before the war, reconstructing the wiring of the rotors and building primitive decryption devices. But once hostilities erupted, the scale and daily complexity of German operations overwhelmed initial efforts. At Bletchley Park, British codebreakers wrestled with permutations that defied intuition. Rooms filled with wire racks, punch cards, and mechanical calculators became arenas of mental combat. Exhaustion and despair were constant companions. Every failure only deepened the tension, reinforcing the belief that Enigma's reputation for invincibility was well earned. The psychological trap was as potent as the machine itself. Nazi officers carried an unshakable confidence, a belief in their own technological superiority. Orders were transmitted without fear, strategies executed with boldness. Even in defeat, they rarely questioned the security of their communications. For the Allies, this arrogance became both a source of frustration and an opportunity. Every intercepted message, no matter how indecipherable, carried within it the seed of vulnerability. The challenge was to recognize patterns, exploit repetitions, and, above all, be patient in a race measured not in minutes, but in months and years. And yet, for all its complexity, the Enigma was not invulnerable. It was a vault, yes, but a vault created by humans with habits, routines, and limits. And every vault, no matter how secure, has a key. The question was not whether the key existed, but whether the Allies could find it in time. Each click of the rotors, each confident transmission by German operators, brought them closer to that moment, unknowingly offering the threads that, if pulled correctly, could unravel an empire of secrets. In the quiet hum of field posts, in the meticulous calculations of codebreakers, the stage was being set. The invincible machine, the guardian of the Reich's most critical information, was about to meet the intellect and persistence of those who refused to accept the impossible. And the fate of thousands of lives, the success of entire campaigns, rested on the outcome. By 1939, the storm over Europe was no longer a distant threat. It was a tidal wave gathering at the continent's doorstep. In Warsaw, Polish cryptographers worked quietly, yet urgently, within the walls of the Bureau Cyfro, the Cipher Bureau. Here, the foundations of what would become one of the most consequential intelligence operations of World War II were being laid. The looming presence of the Wehrmacht and the threat of Nazi occupation lent every calculation, every pattern recognized, an urgency that pressed against the very air they breathed. At the heart of this effort were three men: Marian Rejewski, Jerzy Rosicki, and Henryk Zygalski. Mathematicians, not soldiers, they were tasked with deciphering the German Enigma. Using brilliance and ingenuity, they reconstructed the rotors, mapped permutations, and developed techniques that made the impossible seem possible. Their work, however, was only the beginning. Intelligence alone would not secure victory. It needed a physical instrument, the Enigma machine itself, and the keys, the codebooks, that allowed it to be understood. The Nazis, confident in their machine's infallibility, could not know that their greatest vulnerability lay in the hands of a few determined mathematicians and a network of intelligence agents. In the shadows of Warsaw, clandestine plans were drawn. Couriers moved through streets teeming with Gestapo patrols, briefcases hidden beneath coats, compartments in furniture and car trunks shielding the precious cargo. The risk was immense. Capture meant death, and discovery could collapse the fragile web of early Allied intelligence. The operation unfolded in near silence. Polish operatives coordinated the transfer of Enigma machines and accompanying codebooks from military officers, sometimes under the pretense of ordinary bureaucratic activity. The machines, heavy yet unassuming, were concealed in crates, trunks, and secret compartments. Messages were encoded, then decoded again to mislead any prying eyes, while the mathematicians worked tirelessly to ensure the information they transported would be usable once in Allied hands. Every moment carried the weight of life and death stakes. By late July 1939, The culmination of months of meticulous planning reached its decisive phase. Polish operatives arranged the handoff of the Enigma machines and critical codebooks to British intelligence in a series of covert meetings along the French-Polish border. Couriers travelled under assumed identities, moving through a Europe where every checkpoint was a potential death sentence. The Nazis were already pressing hard on Polish borders, and Warsaw itself was a city under the shadow of impending invasion. Yet, despite the ever-present danger, the transfer succeeded. The machines and their codebooks were now in British hands, a tangible bridge from Polish ingenuity to Allied ambition. The human cost, though, was not negligible. The mathematicians remained in occupied Poland, forced to watch as their nation fell to the Wehrmacht while their intellectual labor was ferried across Europe. Rejewski, Rosicki, and Zygalski had provided the Allies with tools of unprecedented potential, but the task that lay ahead was immense. Possessing an Enigma machine and codebooks was only the beginning. Each transmission, each daily rotor setting, would still require relentless calculation, pattern recognition, and patience. The battle was now as much in the minds of codebreakers as it was on the front lines. By the time the first machines reached Bletchley Park, the stage was set. The tangible prize had been secured, but victory was not yet in sight. The Allies had captured the crown jewel of Nazi cryptography, but unlocking its secrets would demand intellect, perseverance, and a courage of a different kind. The machine was in British hands, but cracking it would take more than bravery. Bletchley Park did not look like the front line of a global war. It was a Victorian estate tucked into the quiet countryside of Buckinghamshire, a manor surrounded by trees, gravel paths, and calm English gardens. But behind its green doors and brick walls, the British government had built one of the most secretive intelligence hubs in history. The mansion buzzed with coded messages, typewriters, and the hurried footsteps of men and women who carried the weight of nations on their shoulders. Here, the battle against the Enigma machine had become a war of intellect, a war where silence, secrecy, and sleepless nights replaced trenches and artillery. This was the world of Alan Turing, Gordon Welchman, and the first generation of Britain's elite codebreakers. Mathematicians, linguists, chess champions, Cambridge scholars, many of them barely in their 20s, were summoned to this estate under the simple directive: break the unbreakable. Turing, with his quiet voice and brilliant, restless mind, attacked Enigma with a determination bordering on obsession. Welchman added structure and strategy, devising methods to exploit German operational habits. Together, they set in motion the analytical machinery that would alter the trajectory of the war. Inside the huts, Hut 6 for Army and Air Force codes, Hut 8 for the Kriegsmarine, the atmosphere was dense with tension. Intercepted German messages arrived constantly, often by motorcycle courier from wireless stations along the British coast. Operators sorted them, logged them, and passed them on to the mathematicians. Many messages were meaningless without their daily settings. Others held fleeting windows of opportunity, routine weather phrases, common military salutations, repeated patterns. Every clue mattered. Every second mattered. The men and women of Bletchley Park worked with the knowledge that lives hung in the balance with each cipher solved. To fight Enigma, they needed machines of their own. Turing and Welchman spearheaded the development of the bomb, an electromechanical device designed to cycle through possible rotor settings at unprecedented speed. Housed in metal frames with spinning drums and clattering switches, the bombers roared through the nights, sounding like factories devouring the silence. They introduced a new, uneasy alliance between human logic and machine calculation, a precursor to computing history forged under the pressure of total war. Yet breakthroughs were rare, and each one came after hours, sometimes days, of exhausting mental strain. There were moments when exhaustion gripped the huts so tightly that even the ticking clocks felt oppressive. But then came nights when everything shifted, when a single overlooked pattern, a repeated German operator mistake, or a subtle clue unlocked the day's settings. One such night, a decrypted message revealed the movement orders of Luftwaffe bomber formations preparing to strike Allied shipping in the North Sea. The intelligence was rushed to RAF Fighter Command. Patrols were redirected, convoys rerouted. By dawn, ships that would have been caught under German bombs were safely out of range. The codebreakers of Bletchley Park never saw the explosions they prevented, never met the sailors whose lives they saved, but they understood the stakes. Each victory in those huts rippled across continents. The emotional toll grew heavier as the months passed. Secrecy wrapped itself around every aspect of their lives. They could not tell family or friends where they worked. They could not explain the all-night shifts, the nervous tension, or the drawn faces of their colleagues. The moral burden was equally heavy. On many days they deciphered German operations they could not act upon immediately, fearing that intervention would reveal Allied code-breaking successes. They lived with the knowledge of danger, ships sailing into U-boat zones, troops marching unaware, yet were bound to silence. Still, they continued. Because every message broken exposed another fragment of the Nazi war machine. And every fragment brought the Allies closer to understanding, predicting, and eventually defeating it. Yet for all their brilliance, the codebreakers knew this truth. Every decrypted message also revealed something else, a new threat, a new tactic, a new enigma waiting in the shadows. The machine was relentless. And time was running out. By 1941, the war had entered a brutal new phase. The Axis seemed unstoppable. U-boats prowl the Atlantic with lethal precision. Rommel's Afrika Korps pressed deep into North Africa, and Hitler's armies advanced across the Soviet steppe. But beneath the chaos of global conflict, an invisible weapon had begun to shift the balance. The intelligence flowing out of Bletchley Park, codenamed Ultra, was now reaching Allied commanders across the world. For the first time, the Allies could read the enemy's thoughts as they were being written. Nowhere was this more decisive than in the Battle of the Atlantic, the lifeline of Britain's survival. Every week, convoys carried food, fuel, and military equipment across waters where German U-boats operated in coordinated wolf packs. These formations, guided by Enigma-encoded messages from Admiral Karl Donitz, were sinking Allied ships at catastrophic rates. In 1942 alone, U-boats sent more than 8 million tons of shipping to the bottom. But Ultra changed the rules. Decrypted messages revealed patrol grids, rendezvous points, wolf pack compositions, and attack orders with startling clarity. Convoys altered course based on intelligence that could not be explained, even to their own escorts. The results were measurable. By mid-1943, U-boat losses surged. In May of that year, later called Black May by the Germans, 41 U-boats were destroyed, many intercepted because Allied commanders knew their exact positions before they even surfaced. Each sinking carried hundreds of German sailors to their graves, yet every destroyed U-boat was another lifeline kept open, another convoy saved. Ultra's influence also stretched deep into North Africa, where Rommel's Afrika Korps had built a reputation for speed, deception, and tactical brilliance. But the Desert Fox never knew that many of his movements were anticipated days in advance. Intercepts revealed fuel shortages, timetable adjustments, and Luftwaffe support schedules. When British 8th Army Commander Bernard Montgomery launched his offensive at El Alamein in October 1942, he did so with a precise understanding of Rommel's constraints, knowledge sharpened by Ultra decrypts. The victory marked the beginning of the end for Axis ambitions in Africa. And then came the greatest operation of the war, D-Day. In the months leading to June 1944, Ultra decrypts detailed German troop deployments, defensive fortifications along the Atlantic Wall, and the exact locations of panzer divisions held in reserve. Allied planners used this intelligence to shape deception operations, ensuring the Germans believed the invasion would strike at Pas-de-Calais. By the time Allied troops landed on Normandy's beaches, Hitler's high command was still convinced the true attack was yet to come. Ultra had turned misdirection into a battlefield weapon. But the use of Ultra came with immense moral weight. Commanders faced agonizing choices: intervene to save lives and risk exposing the secret, or stand aside and let the enemy strike. Ships were sometimes left unprotected. Infantry units marched into ambushes that could have been avoided. Every decision weighed intelligence value against human cost. The tragedy was not hypothetical. Thousands died because revealing Ultra was too great a risk. The secret had to be preserved, not for one battle, but for the war's final outcome. Those who worked at Bletchley Park carried this burden in silence. They knew that every message decrypted was a double-edged sword, a chance to save lives, and a reminder that some lives had to be sacrificed so others might prevail. It was the cold arithmetic of secrecy. And through it all, one truth remained constant. Ultra had become one of the most powerful weapons of World War II. But its power depended on one fragile condition: that the Germans never suspected their machine had been penetrated. Every message read was a gamble. One mistake could expose the secret and cost the war. They arrived at Bletchley Park as civilians: students, linguists, mathematicians, chess champions, engineers, telegraph operators. By 1941, more than 9,000 men and women worked across the mansion and its wooden huts, bound together by a single rule that would shape their lives for decades: tell no one. Each dawn broke not with sunlight, but with the clatter of Typex machines and the hum of bombers spinning relentlessly in dim rooms. The air smelled of oil, damp wood, and fatigue. Most workers were in their late teens and early 20s, carrying responsibility far beyond their years. They knew only fragments of a vast puzzle. Each had a compartment locked from the next, each person aware of only a sliver of the mission. The walls of ears, the posters warned. Even here, secrecy was absolute. Life inside Bletchley was relentless. Shifts ran 6 hours on, 6 hours off, through nights etched with exhaustion. Operators often collapsed after days without proper rest. Some wrote letters home, only to tear them up before sending, fearful a careless line might hint at forbidden work. One Wren recalled hiding her shaking hands under the table during Christmas dinner, unable to explain to her family that she was decoding U-boat positions while the rest of Britain slept. The emotional cost was invisible but immense. In Hut 6, decrypting German army communications, workers cheered when a message revealed a convoy successfully rerouted around danger, yet the joy was short-lived, swallowed by the next page of intercepted coordinates. In Hut 8, Alan Turing's team endured endless cycles of trial and failure, the pressure building with every ship sunk in the Atlantic. Turing himself once admitted that the immense strain of the work made ordinary conversation difficult. But perhaps the greatest burden was silence. Romance blossomed in the canteens and corridors, friendships formed under the dim glow of blackout curtains, but even then, no one could say what they truly did. Couples married without ever learning they had worked only meters apart. Parents died never knowing their children's efforts had helped win the war. Many Bletchley staff carried this locked inside them for the rest of their lives. The paradox was sharp, almost cruel. Their intelligence saved millions, yet they received no medals, no public praise, and often no understanding. When the war ended in 1945, the Official Secrets Act forced them back into ordinary life as though nothing extraordinary had happened. For decades, their achievements were buried behind classified files. Yet in the shadows of secrecy, their triumphs reshaped the war. Each decrypted message shortened battles, rerouted ships, and dismantled German strategies before they could unfold. Their sacrifice was not measured on front lines, but in sleepless nights, missed celebrations, and years spent carrying silent burdens that would never be acknowledged. Behind the victory stood not just machines, but minds, disciplined, exhausted, brilliant. Men and women who fought a war of intellect, where a misread cipher could cost thousands of lives and a correct one could save a continent. The Enigma machine had given Britain a weapon stronger than any tank or gun, a weapon of minds. And every secret kept inside Bletchley Park came with a human price. By the end of the war, the true scale of what had happened in the quiet rooms of Bletchley Park was still unknown, even to most of those who had served on the front lines. Yet historians now estimate that the breaking of Enigma shortened the Second World War by 2 to 4 years. In the Atlantic alone, decrypted U-boat traffic allowed Allied convoys to evade wolf packs that once seemed unstoppable. In North Africa, ultra-intelligence revealed the supply shortages crippling Rommel's Africa Corps, guiding British counterattacks from El Alamein to Tunisia. On the Eastern Front, Soviet commanders, though never told the source, received streams of information that shaped defenses during the Battle of Kursk and the brutal retreats of 1943. Every insight, every intercepted signal, bought time, bought lives, and turned Hitler's vision of a 1,000-year Reich into a collapsing edifice of miscalculated moves. Yet this decisive advantage was buried under layers of secrecy. When the war ended in 1945, thousands of Bletchley Park veterans walked away from their posts and returned to ordinary life. They carried no medals, no public honors, no explanations to their families. The Official Secrets Act bound them to silence, and many died before the world ever learned what they had accomplished. Even Alan Turing, the mathematician whose breakthroughs with the bomb and later the automatic computing engine formed the foundation of computer science, received no wartime recognition beyond a quiet note of thanks. After his prosecution in 1952 under Britain's laws against homosexuality, he died 2 years later, never seeing how profoundly his wartime work had changed the world. Only decades later, after declassification in the 1970s, would his name rise from obscurity to become a symbol of brilliance, courage, and tragic injustice. The legacy of Ultra, however, extends far beyond military victory. The very principles developed to break Enigma, algorithmic logic, high-speed calculation, data correlation, became the backbone of modern computing. Turing's designs evolved into the first programmable machines. The cryptographic methods used to secure wartime communications laid the groundwork for the digital security systems that now protect governments, banks, and global infrastructure. What began as a frantic race against Nazi ciphers became the birth of the information age. But the legacy is also moral. ultra-force commanders, analysts, and political leaders to confront the terrible paradox of intelligence. To save the many, they sometimes had to sacrifice the few. Knowing a convoy was doomed but refusing to divert it, because rescuing it might alert Germany that Enigma was compromised, remains one of the most agonizing decisions in the history of warfare. War demanded secrecy. Secrecy demanded trust. And trust demanded silence, even when silence cost lives. Yet from that silence emerged victory. The Enigma machine, conceived to protect a regime built on conquest and terror, ultimately became its undoing. Not through brute force, but through stolen knowledge, relentless logic, and the quiet dedication of minds working in unheated huts under blackout skies. In the end, a captured cipher machine, a handful of brilliant mathematicians, and thousands of unsung workers transformed the course of the 20th century. A stolen machine, brilliant minds, and relentless courage turned Hitler's secrets into Britain's victory.